Oh my goodness, busy being very neurotic, talking about his personal problems with somebody, and right in the middle of it. So I'll continue with my personal problems. So what happens with Busy is this part of the show before the next final guest, or two guests would be, is that, or maybe three, is that what Busy does is he talk about his mother. So my mother, very important to me, and she crazy person, she beautiful, she inspired me, but she also drive me crazy. So I want to tell you, you're not going to believe this. It's just a little tidbit to give you some idea how crazy my mother was. So before she died, I think this was her last exit to the romantic scene because she divorced my father and then she got into various romances. And so what happened to her was that she came to my sister and I, and she said, she used to always go drink in bars. She used to go to the Bistro 990. Does anybody remember Bistro 990? Yeah, it was on Bay Street. It was like for film stars. And my mother, she lived in that apartment. It's a hotel, Sutton Place. She acted like a movie star. She thought she was a movie star. She was just my mother. That was a bit of a problem. But at any rate, she lived in the Sutton Place and she would go there and maybe she'd be a movie star. So who did she meet? She's probably 60 at this time. But as I said, she looked like Mary Tyler Moore. Anyway, so she's there and she meets, are you ready? Are you sitting down? David Carradine. You know who David Carradine is? Yeah, this is a great story about my mother. I wrote that poem about it. So she meets him and she tells my sister and me, oh, I met a man at Bistro and we're getting along very well. His name is David Carradine. And I said, oh, you know, the actor. I said, wow, David Carradine, that's amazing. And they had a lot in common. I think basically what they had in common is they were both world-class drunks. But at any rate, and of course Carradine was more than that. Very dark character. You know how he died? Here I go again. It's a big night for this. But he tied himself up and he strangled himself and he was masturbating. Anyway, so he's a dark, he took a lot of drugs, David Carradine, he did all that stuff, right? I thought, my mother is friends with David Carradine? And she doesn't know that he's kind of crazy, whatever. My mother was like conservative, like she voted for Barry Goldwater. But then she had this other part of her that was like, you know, whatever. So anyway, she's having this friendship with Mr. David Carradine. She's hanging out with him. I don't know how far it went. I think that probably just whatever, lots of flirtation. My mother was very good at the flirtation. So they're probably doing that. And then at some point she goes, it's over. I'm no longer friends with Mr. David Carradine. And I go, what happened? And she said, well, he slugged me. So yeah, so he slugged my mom. It was even in the paper, like unidentified woman slugged by David Carradine. And then, I mean, she was okay, but he, you know, and I could totally see that happening. Two world-class drunks, two really type A personalities, they get together and he slugged her. So it was over after that. And I think after that, she just sort of decided that she was going to be an old lady, but that's another story. So that was her last big adventure. Good for her. Good for my mother. So my next guest is somebody who, well, you're going to find out about him when I interview him. So he should start coming up here now because he's not quite as old as me, but he moves better than I do. But he has to come up here. Will you please give lots of welcome applause for Mr. David Bateman?
Thank you. Skizzy. Skizzy or Spizzy?
Spizzy.
Spizzy, sorry.
Yelling with.
Okay, great. But that's good. I don't know if I can follow that David Carradine story. But, Spizzy told me he was going to ask me a question about my mother earlier when he sent me a text. So I thought I would read one. I have many mother poems. I'm going to put them all together from all of my books and make a collection called The Mother Poems someday if I ever stop drinking. So this is one that I quite like, and it's basically. So it's called Tampax's Tale. Tampax for me was always something tucked into a little paper bag my mother folded and slid into my pants pocket early 1960s and said, Give this to the cashier, sweetheart, and tell them to read the note inside, but don't look at it yourself, and don't open the bag once they filled it. I don't know if my mother ever figured out that I can't keep secrets, and when someone tells me not to do something, I just do it. There was a short walk from our house to the strip mall by the bowling alley and the barber shop, to the pharmacy and those hot Italian barbers, the Atlas brothers, with the beautiful hairy necks, sometimes shaven clean when I went for a haircut as a child, and sometimes rippled with feathery waves of thin heavenly grasses over the edge of their white barber collars, like slender black reeds on taut, marshy speeds of flesh, like an acre of night in the eyes of a curious child, exploring heaven's cellar, similes craving form and function in the hollow of my gender-bent pre-nubile stays, like Ged's dew dark skin, sweet, swarthy, sexy haiku, braying boyish lust. Hushed by my timid manner, I saw their necks like I saw Tampax. Sights of desire I didn't understand, yet lurking in secret spaces I was trusted with. So they would cut my hair and sit me high on a flat-bottomed wooden hobby horse that didn't rock, lifting my little 7-year-old frame toward their manly scissors. One day I was sent to get my hair cut and told to fill my mother's secret Tampax order after my haircut was done. Paul Atlas raised me high out of the hobby horse's saddle. I pulled the money out of my pocket and the folded paper bag fell on the floor. Paul Atlas bent over and picked it up and said, "Hey, what you got in there, little fella?" I had looked in the bag already, and I had seen the words scribbled on the little square of paper. And I looked at his beautiful neck, and I felt strong, invincible. And I thought of that strange word Tampax, and I had no idea what I was looking at or what the word meant. It made me think of Ajax, a little town near where I lived. And I knew that it was also the name of a cleaning product named after a Greek hero. So I thought maybe Tampax was Greek, too. And I wanted to sound smart and confident in front of that sexy barber, so I said, "Well, it's Tampax from my mom. I get it for her all the time. I think it comes from Ajax, named after a handsome Greek man." Well, the 3 other brothers and their patrons all looked up, startled, uncomfortable, and laughing. Oh, I was a timid child, blonde and small, and no match for all the testosterone assembled in that barber shop that day. Paul Atlas had lifted me into that hobby horse, but this day was a turning point. I was getting a little big for the lift, and from that day on, he let me get in and out myself. And he wasn't as friendly as he'd always been, and my mother noticed that he wasn't as friendly to her, too. And he didn't comment on her nice new hot pant outfits like he used to when she first became a widow. And I grew up fascinated with my mother's body and men's hairy necks and how sleek and lovely they looked when they trimmed that hair, and my father's hairless chest was always a map of the world for me on Sunday mornings. Crawling into bed with my parents and peering over the sleek exposed mounds of his upper torso, enchanted by geography I had yet to navigate and conquer, and the lacy edges of my mother's nightgown, frill and brawn, inhabiting my little head like myth and story at such a tender age. Like Greek gods and the young men and older women who must have loved them. I think it all just made me want to have sex with men named Ajax, and women with secret folded notes in barber shops who laughed at childish mythological stories about Tampax. And now my mother bathed me with her when I was small enough to fit in the same bathtub, and her breasts were like those shaved next to me. It all just meshed together with thoughts of beautiful barbers laughing at me and growing out of child seats, but never growing into manhood until I was almost middle-aged. Forever, that little boy, sent on his own at such a tender age to play with adults, but never given proper instructions, just notes folded into flattened paper bags, and men who would never love me the way I dreamed Greek heroes ought to. You know, sometimes it only gets better when we unfold those notes ourselves and refuse to keep secrets and do what we're told not to and learn to love women bathing us like goddesses, half afraid, but terribly curious in a Greek tragedy kind of way of what we might find in the luscious folded layers of all these mythological bodies.
That's good. Okay, Mr. David. The first thing I want to say to you is a compliment, because I experienced it live here now. And that is that sometimes when I hear you read your poetry, I get intimidated because you're good. And I think maybe I'm not as good. I don't like Spizzy, not like that feeling. It's not your problem. It's all about Spizzy's neurosis tonight. So let's talk about your mother and my mother, okay? But we'll try not to talk about all my mother. But I'm wondering, because we both had these close, now, would you call it, to some degree, from when we came from, a stereotypical homosexual relationship with a mother?
Yeah, I would say that that's something that has been talked about a lot for a century. Freud talked about it. Judith Butler, through Freud, talked about it. We sometimes, our sexuality, our gender can develop through our relationship to our mother. And I think after writing that poem, I realized that without consciously going to people like Butler and Freud, that I was looking at notions of sexuality and gender through that kind of gaze, how we learn that from our mothers and sometimes from our mothers' bodies.
Now, were you, yes, mother's bodies, and were you very distant from your father? That's another cliche, very true for me. Were you very...
No, I was very close to my father, but he died very suddenly in a car accident when I was 20.
Oh.
So I often wonder what that would have been like, because he had his homophobia, but we were very close, and he was a very kind person. But I have no idea, because I lost him fairly young.
Right.
He was an alcoholic, and he lived through the Second World War, fought in the Second World War. He's got a lot of demons, and I think we were close, but it was very conflicted. And then my mother lived for another 30 years, so I had the opportunity to become closer to her.
And what do you say now? Here we got the other part of it, because for me, it was love-hate with my mother. I'll start with this. I thought she could read my mind. I don't know how to tell you. I thought we were the same person. We were so close that I had to be disabused by a therapist at the Hinks Institute, who someone was telling me about Hinks Institute, David, tonight, but another David. So did you feel that?
Well, I think in reference to...
How close was that?
It was very close. In reference to the stereotype, I think that's something that we get perceived as gay men, that we are, even if we're not. And I was very close to her, but we also had... I don't ever hated her, but I loved her deeply, but I also was very aware of how difficult she could be and how difficult I could be. Like, I remember performing in my hometown, and I would take her to those performances, and that's where people would feed off of the stereotype. Oh, there's David again with his mother. But then I'd hear later that if I was on stage and I wasn't paying attention to her, well, I'm on stage, bitch, what the fuck do you want from me? But I heard later that she, when she felt neglected in the audience, she would look at people and say, that little bitch. So I think my mother and I were equally kind and unkind to each other. And that worked for both of us. I loved her deeply.
That reminds me so much of my own mother's, because she used to come to all my openings for a while, all my things that would be like about this guy Gilbert person, and she would come to them, and then she would say, I'm not going. And she'd go, I'm not going anymore. It's just like what you say in a way. She said, I'm not going. I said, why are you not going anymore, mother? And she'd go, because it's all about you there.
Oh, that was not
And I was like, but you're my mother. You're supposed to be happy that it's all about me. And it's, you know what I mean? It's very, very strange, I thought.
My mother was like, my mother wanted to come all the time.
And she got off, because that's what a mother should do. Now, I want to change the subject as, I just want to say, it's very important to understand, though, that we must say this, that, and see if you agree with me, but that there are loads of gay men who are not close to their mothers at all, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is so interesting that though we are part of this stereotype, which seems absolutely true, it's also true that you will meet the ones who do not fit in that. So I wanted to talk about clear this with David. We'll see. But what happened was that when we first, I don't know, was that when we first met? I remember standing in front of the poor Alex Theater.
In the lobby.
In the lobby, thank you. And you came up to me and you said, I think you came up and said, I have a bone to pick with you,
No,
mister.
I think you don't.
Okay. So what did you say? There was some, or maybe you were telling me sorry, or
And you came, well, the way I remember it is that you would come to see a show that I had designed the show. I was still living in Peterborough. And I had just written a review of your show, The Dressing Gown.
Oh my God, that's scary.
And I came up to you, and I don't recall I don't recall saying I have a bone to pick with you. I recall saying I saw your play, and I thought it was really wonderful in many parts, but I have had some issues. But I just wanted to let you know that. And you said, and I remember you looking at me and saying, you let your review speak for yourself, and you turned around and walked away.
Oh my God! Well, when this guy Gilbert character, who I talk about sometimes,
I don't mean you, I mean Sky.
Yeah, but Sky, very defensive, like very defensive. No criticism, do not criticize Sky on any way.
Stop. No,
I figured this out. But you see, I also got that from my mother. Like, you couldn't say one thing to her. And as soon as you did, she'd go, well, I'll tell you why that's happening. And it's because of you, or something like that. You know what I mean?
No, I have to say, thank you for the opportunity, because this has come up a few times over the years, and we love each other deeply in our own distant, beautiful,
That's right.
close way. But years later, but my basic problem, I thought it was beautifully acted, beautifully written, and but I thought there was one element around S&M that I thought was, and I use the word reductionist, I thought it reduced S&M to something that it wasn't.
Well, you were right. That's why I hate that play now.
I know
That's
it.
why, because I was a little boy writing play about how horrible S&M is.
And then you wrote
Like, how fucked up was that? S&M is fine. In fact, it's
You
very
wrote that-
important.
then-
But at the time, I was really fucked up, and you got it. So there you go.
But later, I'll add that later you wrote an introduction to a reprint
Which,
and you said, and I mean this lovingly, basically everything I had already said in the review.
Well, I think it's like Wittgenstein. I always talk to people about Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein wrote one book, and I forget the title, but he wrote one book, and it was all about big philosophy stuff. And then 10 years later, he wrote another book, and he said, I got it wrong. You know, and that to me is what the kind of thing a real artist, a real philosopher should do. I made a boo-boo. Instead of walking around going, oh, I'm always right, I do everything right. I have one more thing or two more things to ask you. This is a really difficult one. Okay. Do you, well, I don't know which one to ask you. Okay. Are you gay? I mean, it's just sometimes I think maybe you are bisexual or something else,
Well,
and I'm sort of technically, believe it or not, I'm technically bisexual, but someone tried to argue me out of this recently. What?
But I always like to quote Moynihan King and Keith Cole.
Good idea.
In recent past, but when I had a show that you programmed at Buddy's years ago called I Wanted to Be Bisexual, but my father was.
Is that the one where you had the Ken doll up your butt?
It was a G.I. Joe.
Oh my God! It was like he had a GI Joe up his bottom, and he turned around and showed us. I'll never forget.
He was actually sewn into the pantyhose. I tried to actually put up there in rehearsal, but he kept falling out. But no, so I would say the way I look at sexuality I'm almost close to your age. I've lived almost 70 years, and we've lived through many different categories.
Yeah.
And I now identify as non-binary. Which allows you to just fuck anyone you like. Which I'm oversimplifying, of course, but I'm queer, and I've had sex with more women than many of my straight men friends, and I only say that because they get so jealous when they discover that. I don't have much sex anymore because I'm older and I'm been HIV positive for 17 years, so I just chose to change that. I'm not endorsing that. So I have been. I think now we can say, I have been gay. I have been bisexual. Or Sky, your dear friend Sky.
Yes.
When he would write letters for me when I was applying for jobs, and you would often introduce the letter by saying David Bateman is Canada's foremost transgendered performance artist, and I thought, well, I didn't know I was foremost, and I certainly didn't know I was transgendered, but thank you for reminding me of those possibilities. So yeah.
Yes, because the only reason why I keep wanting to say is that I'm technically bisexual because I had sex with women until I was 28 years old. Some people don't know that about me. And it's weird because there's two kinds of homosexuals. If you're talking about people who say I'm gay, and there's the ones who've never been inside the vagina, and then there's the ones who have. And it's very, very interesting. Now, what's interesting about me is that I'm never going back inside a vagina again. I've got nothing against vaginas. Don't get me wrong, but I ain't going there anymore. So that, I don't know, how do you categorize that? Very strange.
I think it's a product of your own, and it's like I said earlier, as Freud said, I think the only thing about people say we're born this way, but I believe that we're born with predispositions, but I don't believe in biological determinism. So I believe we have agency, and for some reason, at a fairly young age, I took hold of that agency, and I don't have sex regularly, but my sexuality around women, it wasn't for a certain period. It was all through the period that everyone, and that's a whole other issue we don't have time to talk about, but I was told I was gay for so long,
right?
Despite what I said, because I'm so effeminate. How can you be so effeminate and be anything other than gay?
Me too.
So I just threw my arms and said, okay, I'll just fuck whoever you think I'm supposed to fuck. And
that's part of it.
And that's part of it. But then there are women that I became close to. I still have a very close friend, and we don't have sex anymore, but we did, and she's with a man, and I have a friend in England who is with a woman, and we had a great time. We almost had a child, but she decided not to. And she was a lesbian, but she wanted to sleep with me because she liked the way I looked in drag. So it's very complicated. Sexuality is very complicated, and we can't confine it to one.
Final question for you, and then we have to stop. You, like me, you even said it yourself, you're almost as old as Spizzy. Do you still have sex?
With my laptop? Yes.
No.
I haven't.
It doesn't matter. How do you deal with the aging thing? Are you okay with the aging thing? Because aging is not easy. It's not for sissies, as they say. Go ahead.
Well, I just think we don't have a lot of choice. So
we don't.
I think I manage it all right.
You manage it very well.
Sometimes that annoys me. I get up in the morning, I look in the mirror, and I scream, and then I laugh, and then everything's fine.
I don't think there are many actual models, because we had this thing that happened called AIDS, where a lot of gay men died. We never got to see them be old. So even now, it's the first time we go, oh, these are old gay men. That's what they're like. And it's a huge exploring thing. Okay, I want to thank you very much. I'm sorry I talked so much.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye, Mr. David Bateman, and thank you so much for doing this.
What exactly are chargers and decks? Platter Lube comes in a revolutionary form factor to give you the best possible experience. Instead of that drawer of slimy, grimy bottles we've all got rattling around, just activate a Platter charger, use it, and dispose of it. Individual use chargers are less than half the price of a bottle of the other guys, plus there's more volume. And you can get a whole deck of 5 chargers for about the price of 4. Once activated, each charger has 100 milliliters of water-based lube, which means a deck of chargers has half a liter of lube. Go to platter.com to learn more and get slick with the latest technology for your lube. Live chat is available now at platter.com.